And then there's no other version. There's no software.
Of course there isn't.
Upgrade.
This is what was so surreal about the weekend, with them all queuing up. So, oh no, he's really changed. He's tucked his shirt in. He's really changed. He won't be trying to close down the Privileges Committee like he did Owen Patterson's public shame. Oh no, he's really changed. And you just think, how many times in Boris Johnson's life have people he's betrayed ended up believing that this time he'd be different, this time he's changed. Chris, thank you. Thank you very much. 11:42 is the time. A little bit more on that story I mentioned a moment ago. 9 in 10 schools. There'll be some form of bailout. There has to be. The government, one of Rishi Sunak's earliest tasks will probably be to address this £2 billion shortfall in schools' funding. But when the National Association of Head Teachers warn that 9 in 10 schools will be going into the red in the next academic year, which, we'll be honest, before we know it, you get an indication of just how far and how deep the problems that the country is facing go. Keith's in Carlisle. Keith, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm just thinking that, the deadline's 2:00, I think, isn't it? For
yes, we're nearly there. I'm reading that what's the chops is Penny Mordaunt's people are saying they've got over 90 nominations now, but like Boris Johnson, they're not providing any names or all the names. Yeah. So make of that what you will, Keith. So yeah, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah,
2 hours and 15 minutes.
That's enough time for a U-turn for Boris.
Could be back. He's back again. He's back again. Yeah, my honoured countrymen, I have decided on reflection that you deserve me. You deserve me.
The party's renowned for U-turns. There's an hour and a quarter. He'll be
2
back
hours. 2 hours and a quarter.
2 hours and a quarter. Yeah.
That's right. I do the mistakes with the clock. Thank you very much, Keith. I'm perfectly capable of getting the time wrong without your help. Well, let's not bet against, 185 to Sunak. So I don't know if there's enough left now. What about all the people? Would Nadeem Zahawi, Keith, and James Cleverly, would they then, if Boris Johnson said, only joking, folks, I've got the numbers after all, I'm back in the game, would James Cleverly and Nadeem Zahawi, and actually who else is on my list? Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't think he has come out for Sunak, Simon Clarke, Jonathan Gullis, James Duddridge and Brendan Clark-Smith, would they then put out another tweet or write another article for the Daily Telegraph saying, actually, when I said I was supporting Rishi Sunak, I hadn't really thought things through and I'm back on the Boris Johnson bus after all?
Oh, yes. They couldn't lie in bed straight.
You're telling me. Keith, I have to ask you a slightly inappropriate question. I don't know if you know why, but can I ask how old you are?
I'm 60.
60 years old. We're just trying to find the youngest Keith in the country. We're on a constant quest to find the youngest Keith in the country, and it's not you.
It's not me.
It's not you.
It's not me.
We'll speak again. Thank you, Keith. And keep an eye on the news at 12 noon to see if Johnson's back in the game.
LBC.
10 to 12 is the time. I guess the word unprecedented has been used an unprecedented amount of times in recent months in the context of British politics. I'm afraid I need to wheel it out again now for a quick catch-up on what's been going on in the world of Chinese politics. Remarkable scenes and indeed remarkable moves, which thankfully Steve Sang, the director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London, will be able to talk us through. Steve, thank you for your time this morning. What has happened and why is it so remarkable?
Well, what has happened essentially is that Xi Jinping has now secured a third term in office, and it basically means that he is going to be leader for life. He ended the party congress with a scene that would be seen as a humiliation of his predecessor, former leader Hu Jintao. We don't know really what actually happened beyond what we could actually see on the video, but it would appear that it was a humiliation. If it is not a humiliation of Hu, then it would be a humiliation for Xi Jinping, for which somebody would have been punished. Since nobody has been punished, then we have to work on the basis that Xi ordered it.
And I appreciate we move now into the realms of speculation, but why? And for people who haven't seen the footage you referred to, the former leader was essentially led out of the closing ceremony of the Communist Party Congress, despite being, or not despite, but while sitting beside Xi Jinping, escorted away by officials. It has been stated, I think, by the state news agency that he had not been feeling well, which was a sort of early speculation and early suggestion. So if he wasn't feeling well, and it certainly wasn't expected or something that we've seen before, why might it have happened?
Well, I think you asked the right question. We know that from the video that Hu Jintao clearly was not well. But if he were not well enough to attend the Congress, he should not have been there in the first instance. For him to be removed just before Xi Jinping make his closing speech really would have to be decided by Xi Jinping himself. Now, the context to this is, of course, that Hu Jintao is also the spiritual leader of what in China they call the Youth League faction. Once it was a mighty faction, now it's being reduced to irrelevance, partly by the removal of the three most senior people in the Politburo and the Politburo Standing Committee at the 20th Party Congress. And so by also embarrassing Xi Jinping, a powerful message was being sent, which is that the Youth League faction is no longer relevant. And China now only has one leader. There is not going to be a successor being named, so there's no future leader to think about. And the former leader is now humiliated. So only focus on the one true leader, Xi Jinping.
It's quite Stalinist then, in that sense of just erasing opposition, even if it was only essentially theoretical or symbolic opposition.
Well, in that sense, it was. But then let's not forget that Stalin actually killed his opponent.
Of course. I was speaking tactically rather than necessarily consequentially. But Hu Jintao hasn't been seen since, Steve, has he?
Well, Hu Jintao has not been seen, but Hu Jintao is not somebody that you would normally see on Chinese media anyway. He would only be wheeled out on big events like the Party Congress. So we would not expect to see him. We have also not heard that Hu Jintao is being detained or is being charged of anything. With any luck, the humiliation was all that he is suffering from.
Yes. Did this come out of the blue, or was it widely expected? Because, and the second part of that question would be, was there any constitutional requirement previously for Xi Jinping to be confined to the 2 terms of office that previous incumbents have always had? Has he rewritten the rule book, and were people expecting this to happen?
Well, Xi Jinping rewrote the rule book in 2018 when he asked for and secured a lifting of the age for retirement for the top leader in China. And it is a retirement age limit that he allowed to continue to apply to others. Except that at this particular party congress, of the 2 Politburo Standing Committee members who are members of the Youth League faction, they have not yet reached retirement age, and they were forced to stand down anyway. Whereas a third colleague, Wang Huning, who is a Xi loyalist at the same age as the other 2, is being retained on the Politburo Standing Committee. So basically, Xi Jinping is now saying that rules, my rules, what rules?
It's interesting you put it like that. Finally, one of my listeners listening to you has just texted to say, modern politics has already seen the installation of a new Russian Tsar. Do we now have a new Chinese emperor?
I wouldn't call him an emperor in the sense that he does not have dynastic ambition. There's no indication that he is trying to make it into a North Korean style of handing over to his daughter, but he's certainly making himself increasingly like the dictator of China.
Steve Tsang, many thanks indeed, the Director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, or SOAS as it is popularly known. It's coming up to 11:57. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Good question that from Paul, which I sort of quite cheekily passed off as my own. So after 12 o'clock, we'll have a quick catch up with Theo Usherwood and then probably turn our attention to Boris Johnson. I sort of felt on Friday we should conduct our conversation without talking about him too much, oddly, given that he desperately wanted us to talk about him. And yet today, with his departure from the field, with him sort of, well, I mean, from the outside, he's shuffling off, humiliated after almost certainly failing to secure the support that he needed to mount a leadership campaign. And, of course, the queue of people supporting him or sycophantically offering their applause and encouragement up until late last night, it continues to be of political significance. But I do think, at the risk of tempting fate, and I got a tickly throat then, I had to have a drink. I don't know why everyone's giggling at me. What do you expect me to do? Sit here and have some sort of coughing fit live on air? I do think, at risk of tempting fate, that it might be time to have our last ever "what on earth did people see in him" conversation. I'm thinking of that quote from Simon Clarke, actually, which is both true in a way and terrifying in another way. Everyone knows my loyalty to Boris Johnson. Everyone knows. Mate, I wasn't even sure who you were until I clicked on your bio. The MP for Middlesbrough South. Everyone knows my loyalty to Boris Johnson. Twitter is full of people who will never understand why so many people like him, even love him. And he's kind of right, isn't he? I mean, I understand why you might have liked him to start with, because I did myself, would you believe? Back in 2008, the sort of mayoral campaign in this city was a little bit moribund, and he seemed like fun. I'd seen him on the telly. He's very charming in person. I'd met him a few times. So I think I voted for him to be mayor of London. I'm pretty sure I did. And then within weeks, I'd realised what an absolute disaster he was, because the promises that were made during that campaign began to disappear faster than you could say staff in tube stations or ticket offices or whatever it was, or the firefighters was the real breaking point for me. So I get the initial appeal. I really do. I have to concede that, because I suffered from it myself. What I don't get is the stubbornness of it. What I never understood from about 2008 onwards was how the scales stay stuck to so many eyes. I don't know if the scales are still stuck to your eyes, whether you fancy ringing me today. I hope you do. I'll do my best to be polite. I obviously hold you responsible for much, or people like you responsible for much of the catastrophe that the country is now engulfed in. But I appreciate you didn't do it on purpose. And even if you haven't seen the light yet, it's not entirely your fault. But why do people persist?
On your radio, this is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 12. I fancy a Brexit phone-in. I just don't think today's the day. I want to do a Boris Johnson phone-in because there's a very strong chance, only a very strong chance, not a guarantee, that it will be the last one we ever have, which would be quite significant, wouldn't it, Theo?
Well, according to Will Walden, who of course was his Director of Communications for 4 years, there's no chance of Boris Johnson coming back because he won't do the hard work in opposition.
No, of course he won't.
And of course,
but he might wait there for everything to be so awful that all the. But anyway, I think it might be our last Boris Johnson phone-in ever, which would be quite a nice thing to do. But
you'll do that.
We're going to have lots of Brexit phone-ins moving forward because the oil tanker is finally turning around, even if the leader of the Labour Party is not necessarily going to be the one to pilot it back into the single market. The mood music is changing. People are finding there's a big piece in the title. Are you making that noise?
No, I'm not making any noise.
Did you hear that? It was Theo.
I didn't make a noise.
You did make a noise.
What noise did I make? That's not me.
Are you sure? Keith thinks it was you.
Okay.
You've had a long weekend, I presume. Have you been working hard?
Yes.
May have been a bit of exhaustion sneaking out there. So I can't do a Brexit phone-in today, but I think we're probably going to be having quite a lot of them moving forward, because today is the last chance we have for a Boris Johnson phone-in. And so I will ask what it is about. Why are the scales so sticky? They stuck to my eyes for a matter of weeks back in 2008. It was largely, I think, the amnesty on illegal immigration that attracted me to... What first attracted you to the well-known racist? I don't know, to be honest. I wasn't really paying attention. I was not a very political creature when I began this job, believe it or not. But I am interested in knowing why the scales are so sticky. Why are these MPs today still, or yesterday, queuing up to debase themselves, to claim that they love him, when he has literally gaslit everybody, including now his closest admirers. He's gaslit them. He's humiliated them this weekend. Jacob Rees-Mogg on national television. So, translation, please, Theo.
Boris Johnson's going for it.
Thank you.
He'll be a great Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Oh, and he has
And he has 100 votes.
Thank you. Yes, and he also definitely has the numbers. He's embarrassed humiliated all of them, and yet I don't know if any of the scales will slip away. So we'll examine that shortly. But Theo is here to tell us why.
So we have a clearer idea, I think, about how things are going to pan out over the next 24 hours or so.
You told me that it was going to happen on my show.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? Sorry. We're sort of in that we're in that sort of phase where people are claiming it's one thing when it's clearly not the thing that they're claiming it is. So Penny Mordaunt's got 25 publicly declared backers, but a campaign source is actually saying she's got 90 supporters.
Over 90, actually.
Over 90 supporters, which of course puts her, or would put her if it were true, but there's no way of verifying it. We can only verify the 25. It would put her it would put her very close to the 100 needed to get onto the ballot paper.
So do you now think she is actually up for it, as opposed to merely hanging in for long enough to secure a bigger job from Rishi Sunak than she otherwise would have secured? Because she hasn't got much of a job at the moment, has she?
She's leader of the House of Commons. So she's deciding not to trade at the moment. A concession for a job in a Sunak government. The moment may really have passed because, of course, she loses any leverage she would have had if she doesn't get to those 100 supporters.
Right.
So time is not on her side to do a deal with Rishi Sunak.
Right.
It's likely she will, if she doesn't have the numbers, she will pull out of the contest between now and 2 o'clock.
So it could happen on my watch.
It could happen on your watch,
but it probably
for the
won't. It happens at 2 minutes past.
From what I've been told, there are those within her camp who are actually saying now might be the time just to draw stumps.
Really?
Because
people in her camp are pessimistic.
Yeah.
If she gets to 102, it's game on. What happens with the membership? They were warm towards her back in the day.
They were back in July. They were keen.
The horses might have been scared slightly by the Liz Truss debacle after they essentially brought it upon the country.
That's very true. And of course, it's very difficult to see how she's able to govern effectively. And this will be the argument from Rishi Sunak were that to happen, given that the vast majority of MPs support Mr. Sunak, and therefore you would end up in a situation where the Conservative Party members have chosen one leader, but actually the MPs have chosen another, and that would probably precipitate quite a quick general election if you had a situation where MPs, and their difficult decisions coming very quickly around public spending, where she wasn't able to govern effectively with the support of the party because most of the MPs had supported Rishi Sunak. So you would then end up in a situation where Penny Mordaunt would take the Conservative Party into a general election where they're around 30 points down on Labour. So she will by no means take the same polling lead that she had in the summer into a new contest against Rishi Sunak. My strong hunch is that she will fold well before then. And
you don't think she's
the ERG are giving a statement now. This is the block of European Research Group MPs.
Oh, marvellous. Little Marquis Francois back on the telly. Fantastic. Where's Danger Mouse? And so should we cross live to that?
Yeah, we could cross live to that.
Can we do that? Let's just go see what he's squeaking about now.
A very robust line on the Northern Ireland Protocol, up to and including, if necessary, utilising the Parliament Act to ensure that the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill reaches the statute book.
Absolute gibberish.
In addition, we should say that both of them were very clear that if either of them
is he
were
building
to
up
become
tension,
Prime
Theo?
Minister, they are absolutely determined to do everything they can.
So they've been presented with presented to by both Mr. Sunak
and in its formation and composition would clearly reflect that aim. The ERG have resolved that whoever becomes the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, be that tonight or on Friday, we will unite behind them and assist them in seeking to unite the Conservative Party. That is the statement. We are willing to take a few very brief questions, but then on a fast-moving day.
They're not a bloc, are they?
There are a few other things.
Well,
that
they should be a
have to do.
bloc.
So they should say we are supporting.
Yeah, but they haven't.
Okay, well, someone will ask that.
Position on whether this vote should go to the membership or not, because there seemed to be a bit of a disagreement outside between members as to
it's also
whether
exciting.
membership and the grassroots should have a say on it.
You're actually excited.
Well, the best way I can answer
Mark Francois is speaking. Silence in the courtyard.
We did not endorse either candidate.
Oh, there we go.
We all know what the situation is. If by 2 p.m. Penny Mordaunt has not achieved 100 validated nominations, then Rishi Sunak will effectively become the Prime Minister.
That's ridiculous.
Where does the ERG stand on grassroots having a say?
Camilla, we all understand what the issue is, and what I've said is that
that
we've
is
not
highly
endorsed
debatable
either
if Mark
candidate.
Francois is part of the conversation.
The fact that you guys can't make a decision, does that show that it's still a deal?
Anyway,
We had a very good
Sparky
debate.
Francois has delighted us for
I
long
also
enough.
had a number of text messages
Oh,
from
we've had a
individuals
lot
who
of text
couldn't be here
messages as
because
well.
it's a Monday morning. We normally have our plenary on a Tuesday evening when the House is sitting.
Yeah.
But it was the
Someone should have thought of the
1922
Francois.
committee that dictated a very
Right, that's enough. I think that. Thank you very much.
So
we had a very lively
what we thought was going to happen, what you would expect to happen in this situation, is for the European Research Group, which is a bloc of around, or during the height of the Brexit days, was a bloc of around 80 Conservative MPs. It's obviously a lot smaller there. Mr. Francois surrounded by three or four colleagues.
How many of
from
them do
ERG.
you recognise?
It's the Thanet MP, South Thanet MP. Name escapes me. Apologies, James.
The one that ran for UKIP.
I'd need to check.
All right,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
I didn't recognise any of them. I wasn't having a go.
Sorry,
That's
that's
what
not.
I'm saying,
I should
sorry.
be better.
Right, carry on.
So what you would expect is 80. You know, that in that heyday they had 80 MPs during the Brexit debates when Theresa May was Prime Minister. You know, they would carry a huge block, win the ERG, and then you're over the line. Basically, Mark Francois has come out and said that they're hedging and they're not endorsing either candidate. So it's just a bit of an anticlimax.
Yeah, an anticlimax which you encouraged me to cross live to the House of Commons for.
Well, it was going to be very exciting.
But the words Mark Francois and exciting are very rarely used in the same sentence.
No, it was going to be. It was going to be.
But
exciting.
if he'd said we're putting our weight behind Penny Mordaunt,
Exactly.
then we would be going straight to a leadership battle.
Yes.
If there is a leadership battle, what happens next? I'm genuinely not clear about this. Is it some sort of online vote? We don't have any more.
Yes, it's
hustings.
online. It's online.
And you saw the tortoise report.
Craig McKinley, sorry.
Yeah, ex-UKIP. He was UKIP at one point, I thought so. Is he the young one or the old one?
Yeah.
Is he the one on the end or the one in the middle?
No, he's the one in the middle. On Mr. Francois' left, if you're looking at the television screen.
Stage right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great radio, this. Theo's describing what you can see on the telly, and I'm not even interested. God knows how you're feeling about this part of the programme. 13 minutes after 12 is the time, so we just sit and watch now, do we?
So what's good? Yeah, we're waiting on. Yeah, and if the ERG had come out for Penny Mordaunt, it'd be game on. They haven't. The former Brexit minister, now Northern Ireland minister, Steve Baker.
Brexit hardman Steve Baker.
Steve
To give him his proper title.
Steve Baker, obviously, came out yesterday.
Brexit hardman Steve Baker.
Came out yesterday for Rishi Sunak.
Right.
That is significant. Clearly, they can't all agree with Steve Baker. He used to carry quite a lot of weight within the ERG. That might be symptomatic. You know, you would think that they might follow him. But of course, as you heard from,
Although he sold his Johnson shares very early, to be fair to the fella.
He did.
Actually.
He said the game was up
Yeah.
back in the spring.
But then again, so did Jonathan Gullis and Brendan Clark-Smith and Nadeem Zahawi and James Cleverly, and it didn't stop them jumping back into bed with him at the first opportunity. Apologies for that mental image.
So we're just waiting.
Waiting. We are waiting.
No, we'll have a and sorry, there's just one other thing to add.
That's what we're waiting for.
We understand the King is still in Sandringham at the moment. He'll be
What?
in Sandringham until later.
Oh, I see.
And so if the transition would probably take place tomorrow. So we'll get the announcement
This would be when the
today.
new Prime Minister goes to the monarch and asks for...
We've been told by the Prime Minister's spokesman that it's going to be smooth and efficient, but it will happen tomorrow because the King will need to come back from Sandringham tonight to Buckingham Palace, which is his working residence, and then Liz Truss firstly goes to Buckingham Palace and followed by, we would expect, if there is a coronation, it'd be Rishi Sunak, of course.
Speaking of the King, do you know what's just happened in Madame Tussauds?
There's been an incident involving Just Stop Oil.
They have put custard pies or cakes in the face of the King's waxwork model. 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at Madame Tussauds, as some people say, in central London after police were called this morning after protesters from Just Stop Oil threw chocolate cake at the waxwork of King Charles. So there you have it. It's all going on.
Yeah, busy.
19 minutes after 12 is the time. So I've got quite a straightforward question for you now, and I haven't done a proper churn yet. So you've got your best chance of getting through to the programme in a few weeks, actually, given that there's only 40 minutes left until Sheila gets here. And I don't really want to do a 10-minute introduction because, A, it's a fairly straightforward question, and B, I've done plenty of pontifications on this precise subject over the years that I don't feel the need to do another one. However, I could, from the top of my head, list all manner of behaviours from Boris Johnson that would have scuppered any other political career years ago, whether it was colluding to get a journalist beaten up back in the day. If that came up at a constituency selection meeting when you were trying to become an MP, it would almost certainly have constituted curtains for many candidates, whether it was the alley cat sex life that he pursued and lied about repeatedly, even while holding senior roles like Mayor of London, whether it was the lies to voters, employers and colleagues alike, whether it was the appalling attempt to tear up the rule book after one of his cronies, Owen Paterson, was found to have broken the rules. And I still find perhaps the most egregious sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the late Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. I mean, you just take your pick and there's a million I'll forget. I could do that off the top of my head now. And the point is this, the point of this question in this part of the programme. So the phone lines are open, 0345 6060 973. You know the old figure of speech about the scales fall from our eyes. I don't actually know where it comes from. Don't ring me to tell me. You can text me if you want. I'm not that interested. The scales fall from your eyes and you see the truth before you, right? How have the scales proved so sticky with Boris Johnson? And I'm not even thinking about punters and voters necessarily, because we don't pay as much attention as, for example, parliamentary colleagues would do. You've got 50, 60, 70 Conservative MPs yesterday, many of whom had finally mustered up the wit to tell him to sling his hook after his abominable conduct with regards to Chris Pincher, the MP accused of groping 2 men while drunk most recently, and promoted by Boris Johnson despite knowing of his reputation for that sort of behaviour. That proved to be a breaking point for some people. Some scales fell from some eyes, it seemed. But what we discovered yesterday, and what we discussed for the first part of the programme today, was that those scales got stuck straight back on again. People like Jonathan Gullis and Brendan Clark-Smith and Nadeem Zahawi, they stuck the scales back on again. As soon as there was a chance of getting Johnson back after a few weeks of dust supposedly settling, the scales would say they never really saw the light at all. They never reached a point where the moral bankruptcy of Boris Johnson had become too much for them to bear. They never reached a point where the political corruption of Boris Johnson had become too much for them to bear. They never reached a point where the personal amorality of Boris Johnson, the depravity of Boris Johnson, had become too much for them to bear. Because at the very first opportunity, they were prepared to usher him back in again. So that brief swell of hope that some corners of the Conservative Party had finally found a moral compass when they told Boris Johnson to sling his hook, well, it disappeared yesterday when many of the people that told him to sling his hook revealed that they had not got any more of a moral compass today than they had back then. It was all self-interest, which they presumably thought would be better served by bringing him back than by leaving him in the Caribbean. So 23 minutes after 12 is the time. Probably, possibly, indeed, hopefully, for the very last time, it was St. Paul, apparently, on the road to Damascus, where the figure of speech, the scales fell from his eyes, came from. It's good to know. Thank you for everybody who's told me. Hopefully, for the very last time, why even now, and I refer you back to Simon Clarke's ridiculous tweet. This is an MP who wrote, I genuinely find this staggering, because he has been in Parliament while all of these calumnies and catastrophes have been visited upon the country. Everyone knows my loyalty to Boris Johnson. Twitter is full of people who will never understand why so many people like him, even love him. They do so because he reflects the optimism and pride in community and country that they feel, and because he gave them a voice. This is the man who said, let the bodies pile high in their thousands during coronavirus, who skipped 5 Cobra meetings at the outset and refused to acknowledge the gravity of the looming situation. A man who has ridden roughshod over all of the requirements of standards and decency for his entire career. So I'm not confused by the initial act of falling for it. I get that. Not paying particular attention. You've seen him on the telly. He's a bit different from other politicians. It's all fake, of course. You know that now. He ruffles up his hair before he walks onto the stage. He pretends he doesn't know where he is. Someone wrote, I forget who it was, wrote a brilliant account of meeting him twice. And the first time being utterly charmed because they thought that this sort of bumbling shtick was really charming and refreshing, and then he did exactly the same shtick the second time they met. It's a similar scenario. It was all fake, all made up. He did exactly the same lines, the same tricks, the same jokes. Utter contempt for people. But I understand how you can fall for it in the first place, right? That's easy to do. How can you still be falling for it now? And you can either talk personally about someone you know, or indeed even about yourself, 0345 6060 973. Or you can join me in speculating about the motivation of someone like Simon Clarke MP, who has seen Boris Johnson lie about parties, has seen the truth emerge about Downing Street turning into a satellite of Stringfellows nightclub while the rest of us were prevented even from meeting our own parents, our own mothers during lockdown. Simon Clarke MP has served in a government that has sought to protect Owen Paterson from the consequences of his own actions, that has seen Priti Patel essentially proven to be a bully when the independent advisor resigned after Boris Johnson did nothing. He's seen the son of a Russian spy being elevated into the House of Lords despite objections and concerns from pretty much all corners. He has seen Boris Johnson behave with absolute contempt for both convention, decency and voters. And yet, Simon Clarke MP says this morning, Twitter is full of people who will never understand why so many people like him, even love him. And that's what I want your help in understanding. Having seen the measure of the man in glorious technicolor, having had your face rubbed in to his abject awfulness, what explains the continuing devotion to this utterly undeserving scarecrow? What is it? How can it be? Because it's never going to happen. That's the incredible thing about this morning. It may well be, and please goodness it is, it may well be our final phone-in about what it is that allows people to forgive personal, political and professional moral corruption on a biblical scale, because it's never going to break. People who scales have not fought, they will never fall. This is the Fifth Avenue moment. This is the, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote that Donald Trump boasted about, demonstrating a political acuity that frankly has really stood the test of time. He somehow got it. He knew that he was offering something to people that meant they would forgive everything else. And that perhaps is the essence of the conversation we're about to have. What was it that Boris Johnson offered to people that somehow encouraged them to forgive everything else? It definitely isn't reflecting optimism and pride in community. He maligned the whole of Liverpool. He maligned Muslim women. He maligned men of colour. I mean, he maligned huge. I mean, maybe Simon Clarke doesn't consider them to be part of the same community and country that I live in, but I do. So it can't be that. Pride in community and country. He insulted everybody. And finally, of course, he's insulted people like Simon Clarke MP, who are possibly too moonstruck to realise it. Too, what's the word you want? Entangled? So what is it? What is it that he offered people that allowed them to overlook all of the awfulness? That's the crucial point. Maybe they don't care about the awfulness. But with any other politician, you would have done. So there must be some offer there. There's something transactional. Donald Trump, I'm afraid, clearly offered people permission to be disgusting, permission to be racist, to be misogynistic, to celebrate sexual assault. He offered people something truly horrible. And more people than I ever understood or realised I shared a planet with bit his arm off. They loved it. Fantastic, we can be racist again. He's going to ban Muslims. He goes around sexually assaulting women and boasts about it. So I know what that was. And I have to posit the possibility that Boris Johnson offered up a sort of Etonian version of something similar. I said to you on Friday when I went through the list of things that I found repellent, that other people find them fantastic. Calling people smiling pickaninnies with watermelon smiles. I love it. Calling gay people tank top bum boy. Oh, I love it. I love it because I hate the gays and I hate the black people. Insulting Muslim women. I love it because I hate Muslims. Is it that simple? Did Boris Johnson somehow become a sort of Nigel Farage tribute act, but with genuinely persuasive bonhomie? Just another barroom bore, but possessed of a skill set that propelled him to places he should never have been allowed to. Is it that simple? Is he just Donald Trump stroke Nigel Farage, but better at it, at his core, and better at hiding the foulness? People who still believe in Boris, writes Helen. Number one, men who admire cheating men. Number two, women, especially older women, who think they see something vulnerable in him. And number three, family. Rachel Johnson said yesterday that she believes he would never lie to her, and she also believed the 102 figure. Even family would need qualification. Joe Johnson, one of the other brothers, actually left the House of Commons when his brother became leader. He subsequently accepted a seat in the House of Lords, but he didn't want to be an MP under his own brother as leader, which is a fairly damning indictment, and something else you could put on the list of things that would have seen the scales fall from a supporter's eyes if it was any other politician. So what was it? We'll begin our collection of responses after the very latest headlines with Lottie Morley.
Rishi Sunak has the support of more than half of Tory MPs to become the next Prime Minister. To move forward in the contest, Penny Mordaunt now has less than 2 hours to get 100 of her colleagues on side. Only 27 have publicly backed her. The European Research Group says it will support whoever wins the leadership vote after they couldn't collectively endorse a particular candidate. Sir Keir Starmer says the country must move on from what he's called the chaotic circus of the Tory leadership. Speaking to LBC earlier, the Labour leader has renewed his calls for a general election to give the public a say. Elsewhere, 4 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at Madame Tussauds in central London. The Metropolitan Police were called this morning after protesters from Just Stop Oil threw chocolate cake at the waxwork of King Charles. LBC weather, showery rain for the far northwest, dry and sunny elsewhere with scattered showers in places and a high of 17 degrees.
LBC.
COVID-19 and flu spread more quickly in winter and can both cause serious illness. Protection provided by COVID-19 vaccines decreases over time. So if you're over 50, in an at-risk group, or pregnant, boost your immunity now. And because flu viruses can change every year, many adults and children can also get a free flu vaccine. Vaccines are your best protection, even if you've had COVID-19 or flu. Find out if you're eligible at nhs.uk and book now.
My Weekend by Luke. Me and Mum go to the park if it's sunny.
Sadly, that's not what happens.
Mum's not the best at footy, but she tries.
She tries, but she's too ill to leave the house. Luke looks after her.
In the afternoon, my mate Abby comes over.
I'm Abby. I work for Bernardo's, helping children like Luke. Every day, families like his are struggling with the cost of living. Will you help? If we can change a childhood, we can change a life. Search Bernardo's to join us.
With her new iPhone 14 Pro, Izzy can now see every tiny feather on the robin hiding in that holly bush. Amazing! See the world at its most beautiful with the incredible new iPhone 14 Pro. Get it from Vodafone today with the UK's only phone buyback guarantee. And get a guaranteed buyback price when you trade it in.
Selected devices only. Trade-in in good condition from September to October 2023 via our trade-in tool. Airtime and device eligibility checks and terms apply. See vodafone.co.uk/buyback. Credit by Vodafone.
As a Bolt driver, I work hard. I work long hours, getting people where they need to be. From A to B. So, at the end of the day, I expect a fair deal from my employer. I deserve better.
Bolt drivers, following the successful Uber claim, be part of the fight for the compensation and workers' rights you deserve. Join Lee Day's Bolt Drivers Claim today. Visit leaday.co.uk/boltclaim or text CLAIM to 82727.
Sometimes you just need to get away. And for the Agarwal family, it was well overdue. They wanted to know exactly what they were getting, like knowing their kids stay and eat a delicious breakfast for free.
Yes!
And no need to lug heavy bags, with free parking at over 500 hotels. Enjoy the same feeling whatever the trip. Premier Inn. Rest easy. Only available to book at premierinn.com. T's and C's apply. Up to 2 kids stay and eat breakfast free with a full paying adult.
Hello there, it's the Hairy Bikers here, and we are here to help you. Yes, you listeners, to get more from your food.
We are indeed more character, more delight, and more flavour.
Yeah, and we know a proper tasty way to do it. With Knorr, of course, the nation's favourite stock.
That's right, so whether it's a chicken or chickpea comforting curry,
or a hearty beef or bean chilli for dinner tonight,
just be sure you give it more with Knorr.
To verify, call 0800 731 1411.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
It is 12:34, and it is a question I've asked a million times over the last few years and may never ever ask again. But how could Boris Johnson retain the support of so many people, even as his utter personal depravity, and I use that word advisedly, and political catastrophe became crystal clear? I mean, truly crystal clear. Pick one example that could have done for any other politician, and with him there are 50. I still don't get it. Probably because I resist the conclusion that it's the same appeal as Trump's, which Andrew describes as, it's simple, James, bullying men and doormat women. I don't like that phrase, but I'm asking a question and I will accept all answers as long as they're politely offered. 12:35 is the time. Gary's in Knightsbridge. Gary, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Thanks for having me on, first off. I will try to be half as eloquent as you.
Oh, thank you.
So I actually think the mechanics are similar to Trump, although I think the drivers are a little different. And I think you have to separate the parliamentary MPs from the members.
Yes.
And I think when it comes to the MPs, it's pretty straightforward. I think the MPs have viewed Boris as their route to power. We don't really have a conservative party as such anymore that's driven by what might consider to be classic conservative values. It's just a cult of personality with Boris. He's their route to power, and they will forgive any of the transgressions as long as they view him as the route to power. And up until
this is the MPs.
Morning, this is the MPs, and I think up until today, they still viewed their route to power was Boris. If he got his 102 and it went to the members, they would have voted for him.
Yes, they would, and they believe he would have done better in a general election than anybody else.
Absolutely.
But though there's one line. Hang on, I'm badgering the witness here. But this line, and this guy is an MP. He might not be representative of a broader constituency, but I think he is. And he's not right. He's writing, Twitter is full of people who will never understand why so many people like him, even love him. Why would you add the words even love him if it was just a pragmatic calculation based on the pursuit of power? I think there's a bit more going on.
He would love him, or why a voter?
Well, this is an MP writing. People, I mean, he's obviously writing about himself. Twitter is.
Yeah, because I think the MPs are telling a story. At the end of the day, I think they're interested in their political power, and I think the profession of love for Boris is it's all part of an act. Right.
Maybe.
I think when you look at the voters, I think it's a little more interesting. And this is where it gets to the Trump question. Right, and and I don't. Well, you can tell I'm American,
yes.
But the attraction to Trump may or may not be the things you described. But when it comes to Boris, I think the attraction amongst the voters is, I think he gave people a reason and a way out of what they perceived as the difficulties in their life, and it all came down to the Brexit issues and the fact that Europe was our central problem, and Boris was going to show us the way out of that, and he was going to get it done. And I think there's also a cult of personality there, much like there is with Trump as well. So I think it's those two things which continue to attract, if not the broader voter base anymore, certainly the members are still very attracted to Boris.
But does that account, that sort of twin analysis, does that account for the stickiness of the scales, Gary? The way that you would expect if that people had been led to a position by the processes you describe, how have they not been led out of it by all of the scandals and catastrophes?
I mean, I think when it comes to the MPs, it's self-evident, right? Because they've only given up on him when they saw he didn't have the 102, even though he said he did.
Yeah.
Once he didn't have the 102, that's it. We'll throw him overboard. And I think they knew all along what a scoundrel he was, but they were willing to look beyond it.
Because the public were. So in a way, they feed off each other, these positions, don't they? The public are happy with. So that's why the Republican Party is essentially in the process of eating itself, because they know that they know how a lot of the politicians in the Republican Party know precisely how disgusting Donald Trump is, but they also know that their potential voters are still lapping it up. So they have to go along, most obviously, with the big lie about the last election.
You've got it.
So it's the tail wagging the dog. Gary, thank you. That helps, actually. Oddly, I don't know whether it's a warped form of patriotism. I don't like the parallels with Donald Trump. I never have. Anyone who's listened to the programme for the last 3 years will know that I very reluctantly reach for them, but sometimes one is left with very little choice. He is a similar creature, a similar beast to Donald Trump, albeit that the lies are different and the behaviours are different. The fundamental absence of contrition or conscience is, I think, identical. And the mystery for me is why people watch these disgusting things happen and don't feel their support diminish, don't feel a single scale fall from their eyes. Carl's in Bournemouth. Carl, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there.
Hello.
First-time caller.
Welcome, Carl.
I just can't believe I got suckered into the cult of Boris for the very first, how can I say, the first period of his term, and then suddenly realised what a complete and utter idiot I've let in. You know, I thought, oh my God, you know, the Brexit lie, you know, oh my Lord, you know, like a lot of them. And just as your previous caller said, the cult of Boris. My parents, bless them, they're in their 70s.
Yes.
And I say to my mum, why do you believe? But he's got fluffy hair and he speaks. Oh, he's very, you know, that's the appeal to the older people.
I'm going to need a bit more than that. I mean, what would they say if you sort of, you know, got the old thumb screws out and said, what is it you like about him? What would they say? What is it? Or if you said, but he's done all these...
He's a likeable guy. Or you could just, with ruffly hair. This is like, because my parents are Conservative. I'm a floating voter.
Sure.
I voted for Tony Blair until the war, until the lies. But the same, I hate this. Like Boris, he's the most, oh my God, unethical politician we've ever had. You know,
of course he is. And yet your parents can't see it. Not at all. Do they not care? I mean, that's the mystery, isn't it? Is that we're trying to...
Yeah.
It's psychology, this, not politics. So he does something to them that makes them turn off concerns they would usually have.
All the people in their street, you could say, because they're middle class, they live in Bournemouth, they've got a bit of money, no mortgage. For them, it's all, I've won my dad round. I've actually won my dad round. I've won my dad round because I said, look, listen to Keir Starmer, what he's saying and what he's talking about. You know, I mean, all right, he might not be everybody's cup of tea. He might not be the most dynamic, but my God, I think we don't need dynamic. We just need a steadying hand on the ship.
He is quite dynamic, just not necessarily in the ways that lend themselves to a 24-hour news cycle. When did your support snap? When did the scales fall from your eyes? At what point in the last 3 years did you go, oh?
Oh, crikey.
Yeah.
Oh, blimey. Let me think.
Take your time.
Just literally after the Brexit fiasco, just before lockdown, I thought, oh dear, this is going. And then after COVID, and
it's an accumulation of circumstances. It's a mark of his leadership. You say Brexit fiasco, and I'm wondering which one you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all of it.
Thank you, Carl. Love to your dad. Actually, I nearly did the exploding heads line there, which I didn't mean to. I meant it. You can see that. So that's the thing, isn't it? We're never going to get the absolute algorithm right. But what is it? So some people still clinging to the carcass of his reputation, even though he has. At least he never ended up with a big lie like Trump, but he never ended up continuing to feed the faithful by telling ever bigger lies, culminating in a lie so big that it nearly spawned a coup attempt. Well, it did spawn a coup attempt. It nearly spawned a coup. Johnson's never done that. But who knows what he would have done if he'd had another crack at power. That was the other scary thing about this weekend. Michael's in Birmingham. Michael, what do you think?
Hello there, James.
Hello,
I think Sangeeta's call perfectly summed it up. That horrific call that you put on the YouTube.
This is for people who didn't see this. And I haven't listened to it all myself. But someone rang up Sangeeta Maiska, who's on at weekends now, doing an absolutely brilliant job. I can't remember anyone hitting the ground running quite as fast as her when they've joined the LBC team sheet. But someone rang up to say that Rishi Sunak could never be Prime Minister because he wasn't British. And then made some reference to terrorists or something like that. It was horrible. But I don't know how representative people like that are of broader constituencies, Michael.
Well, he claimed that he spoke for all Boris votes, obviously not entirely true, but I think it's worrying that he might be clearly hanging around in circles that are. I think the point is, though, in that particular person,
yes,
he stopped short of saying what he wanted to say, which is something you see a lot with these, and I've spoken with a couple of them, I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah.
They don't come out and say what they want to say, which is they don't like black and brown people.
Yeah.
It's a horrific thing for me to say, but that's what they stop short of it, and they make up all of these excuses. But
yes.
Boris says the things that they.
Well, does he though? I mean, you're going right back to the letterboxes and the smiling pickaninnies, which are two relatively. I use my words carefully. I mean, there's not a lot of...
In the grand scheme of things he's done...
Yeah, but there's not a lot of it. It's not like Farage, is he, doing the stuff like this every time he opens his grubby little gob? You have to go right back into the weeds of his journalistic career, less so with the letterboxes stuff. But for the smiling pickaninnies grossness, he hasn't made a career out of saying things that could be construed as racist.
I guess when he boinged into the public consciousness regarding it, I think it ties into this idea that I hear people say a lot, which is, it's not like it was in my day. This idea of this awful, God knows what the day was like. I'm very lucky I'm 26 and I wasn't around to see it if they want to live in this wonderful racist utopia.
Yes.
But it taps into this idea of kind of the good old days and, this idea that our kids have it easy. Isn't that the point? Aren't you meant to leave it better for the people who come after you? But I've gone off topic. What I was going to say was,
you haven't really
tapped into this. And
so
it's the
people
same thing.
think that he would agree with. So what he has achieved is a perception among people like that horrible man who phoned Sangeeta. He thinks that Johnson would agree with him. When he, if they were to share a drambuie together, and he came out with his really vile racist bile, Johnson has created, whether it's true or not, I wouldn't like to say, but he has created in the minds of people like Jerry from Lowestoft the idea that he is just as racist as they are, and that is why they will forgive him anything.
Or rather, almost that he's a leader for them in that he says the things that we're all thinking. Now, I know we're not thinking it, but that's another phrase, well, it's what we all think, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it isn't. And this idea that he's, obviously hidden behind parliamentary privilege and he's enabled himself to say these things, but become this, I believe you had a call a couple of months back who said he'd been cowed into silence by woke people.
I've had a few over the years, Michael. I can't complain, though, to be honest. It's been very good for business. But yeah, they insist. I think that the first one I ever had actually was a bloke saying you can't say what you want in this country about immigration without being called a racist. But you'll have to buy my first book to refresh your memories on what actually followed from that. You're right. These people who say they can't say what they say without being accused of something, and then you say, well, say it then, and then they prove that they're exactly the thing that they're complaining about being accused of. It's a very strange mental gymnastics that they undertake, and of course they now file it as being anti-woke. Thank you, mate. You made me a bit late for this, which I hope you take as a compliment.
Coming up at 1 on LBC, Sheila Fogarty.
At 2 o'clock, we'll know if Rishi Sunak is our new Prime Minister or not. Stick around, we'll get there together.
Sheila Fogarty on LBC. Bye. James O'Brien on LBC.
I think we've got a late winner. For the first 2 hours of the programme today, give or take a fascinating update on what's unfolding in China at the moment, we were trying to find the MP or the supporter of Boris Johnson who had humiliated themselves most egregiously over the course of the last 24 hours. I completely missed this one. This is Lucy Allen MP, BA, ACA, ACIS, LLM. Keith, do you have all your academic qualifications on your Twitter biography? No? Theo Ashwood, do you have all your... I mean, you'd need a whole new biography, wouldn't you, for all the letters after your name? So here, Lucy Allen MP for Telford, BAACAACISLLM, tweeted last night, I backed Boris for PM, but I think he has done the right thing for the country. I mean, I recognise the words and I understand what they mean, but put them all together and what on God's green earth is she talking about? I backed Boris for PM, but I think he has done the right thing for the country. We may have a late winner. Theo, what are you doing here?
Well, I'm telling you that it appears now to be all over for Penny Mordaunt. She's just lost her campaign manager during this leadership contest. George Freeman, one of the Norfolk MPs, has just switched sides, saying it's now time to unite the party and get behind.
Was he looking after this campaign?
Yeah.
Well, that's not great.
No, it's not, is it?
Why would he do that? Just to try and get himself another job?
I think there's a frustration amongst those close to Penny Mordaunt that I was talking to you about earlier on your show, that she isn't quite... the penny hasn't quite, excuse the pun, hasn't quite dropped, that actually she needs to actually concede defeat.
Right.
And so he's just tweeted, Penny is a huge force for conservatism with the life story, vision and courage to help lead a conservative revival. I'm proud to support her, but given the urgent need for conservative stability and unity this week, I'm urging her to join and back
Rishi Sunak today. Thank you very much.
So in the usual form...
So it could still happen on my show.
It could still happen.
6 minutes before Sheila starts.
But the usual form is that actually you concede before your campaign manager reverts to the other side. That's what usually happens.
Yeah, I mean, one should really follow the other. So yes. I, Penny Mordaunt, have decided to back Rishi Sunak.
And then
George Freeman, Penny Mordaunt's campaign manager, have also decided to back Rishi Sunak. But for the campaign manager to go before the campaign...
It's not great.
It's not great. But then again, we're living in uncharted waters. We are living in unprecedented times. Thank you, Theo Ashwood. Great work, as usual, today. Can't believe it's still only Monday. I feel like I've been doing this for weeks. Anyway, by Sheila Fogarty time, we should know now that we've got a new Prime Minister. Morris is in Venice to steer us back to the last one but one. The curious appeal, the stickiness of the scales affixed to the eyes of Boris Johnson's admirers. Morris, what can you tell us?
Well, he resembles a group of patients I described about 20 years ago in a psychotherapy lecture, which I described as being charming, that they charmed people into doing things that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And even when they've been caught out once or twice or three times, they continue to succeed.
Yes.
And so it's a sort of a magical process. And I suppose I remember when he was putting himself forward for the Mayor of London, like you, I thought he was interesting, and I was getting fed up with Ken Livingstone because I thought Ken had been good but was hanging on too long.
Yes, that's pretty much where I was.
And I was tempted to vote for Boris, but I couldn't because of my commitment to the Labour Party. And actually, pretty soon, I found him obnoxious, actually.
Yes.
And the interesting... it's an interesting impact it's had on my social life. Is that I've been married for over 40 years to an intelligent and successful lady.
Yes.
Who has become somewhat preoccupied with Boris Johnson.
Oh, no.
To the extent that she had some dreams about him.
Pardon?
And told me the following morning that he was really rather a nice person.
Good grief.
And that she decided that she was going to try and write his acceptance speech to a Prime Minister and how he would apologise for the things that he'd done wrong. And anyway, I couldn't... we are still talking to each other.
I'm very glad to hear it. Is she with you? Is she with you in Venice, Morris?
She's with me in Venice.
Well, what a wonderful setting with which to rekindle the fires of romance before Boris Johnson's dreams came along.
Absolutely. Anyway, and she's still talking about when he comes back.
Oh my days!
He's going to handle it.
Oh my days!
He has. I think what happens is that people suspend reality when they're with him.
Yes.
And
and
he just does have that impact. If you aren't affected by it, or if you see what it does to other people, you become appalled and you can't understand why anybody does it.
No, but to be, having breakfast every day with somebody in that category is a remarkable situation for you both to find yourselves in. The scales have clearly fallen pretty quickly and completely from your eyes, whereas your wife remains somewhat enchanted by the fella. And you use the word magic, so I think perhaps the word enchanted is the best. I've only got a minute left for Andrew in Muswell Hill, but I know you're a psychiatrist, which actually tallies quite neatly with some of what Morris was saying. You're going to have to be very brief, Andrew. What would you like to say?
Yes, well, it does dovetail quite nicely with what Morris has just said. The first thing to say is, certainly having worked with people with personality difficulties over many years, Boris has classic narcissistic personality traits, a capacity to charm people and a constant need for external validation. I think that seems clear.
That's what this weekend was all about, wasn't it? The external validation.
Absolutely. But just from the perspective of, those who keep voting for him and still hold him, I think this comes back to something quite fundamental in the psyche of a certain population, which is that, people need to feel safe with a leader. And I think our capacity for denial of someone's less attractive traits can be astounding when we're anxious or frightened.
Yeah.
And I think, the scales you talk about, so, a willingness to disregard delinquency, a power hungriness, etc., is quite spectacular, and it goes back to childhood. Nobody wants to feel that they're with a parent who's unsafe or breaks the rules. So I think our capacity to sort of shut off an aspect of reality can be very powerful, especially when we're frightened. So I think this is one way that links both him and Trump.
And of course that promise of safety and security is based entirely on them constantly telling you about the enemies from which they're going to protect you, whether those enemies exist or not, whether it's bureaucrats in Brussels or Muslims massed on the Mexican border. And you brought it in on time. What an absolute privilege. Those last two calls. That was just fantastic, although I'm going to worry about Morris and his wife now for at least the rest of the day. Sheila Fogarty is here. Once again, the big stories will break on her show.
I'm paying them.
Yeah. It's great, isn't it? Fantastic. Yeah.
Your beard has taken on Pauline.
It does need a bit of a trim.
It's good. I feel a bit safer. I feel like I'm in a room with an apostle.
You're not the first person to say that, Sheila.
I think Morris's wife, by the way, has Boris derangement syndrome.
There it is.
Yeah, it's a thing. By 2:00 today, much to James's chagrin, we'll know whether Rishi Sunak is our new Prime Minister or not. We'll learn whether Penny Mordaunt has enough votes to stay in the race and whether she intends to. You and I, though, get no vote even at this point. No general election imminent. 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 No general election imminent.